Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for Not Parent Expected or Non-Paternal Event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out.
Welcome to episode 213. Today is a special episode with a different host and 4 guests. I will do introductions in a moment, but first, our commonalities. In the past half dozen years, all 5 of us discovered that our fathers are not our genetic fathers. This is a situation known as misattributed paternity. Since our discoveries, we have continuously provided education and resources to people experiencing similar genetic discoveries. For example, all 5 of us have previously been guests on podcasts. 4 of us gave lectures or poster presentations at the 2023 and 2024 Untangling Our Roots conferences. 2 of us created the NPE Guide, which I firmly believe is the best resource for people to use on day 1 of their unexpected genetic discovery. 1 of us wrote a book titled Who Even Am I Anymore, which is a great resource for a deep dive into the effects of your genetic discovery. We've done other activities, but I've made my point, and links to all these resources will be mentioned in the show notes. So who are we? My name is Richard Wenzel, and I was this podcast's guest for episodes 73 and 100. 2 things about me relevant for today's discussion. There is an abundance of evidence indicating that decades ago, my pediatrician knew that my father was not my genetic father, and he lied about it, including lying about it straight to my face. Needless to say, I am not happy with him, especially because today I am a healthcare professional. I'm a pharmacist who has spent most of his career working in academic teaching hospitals, caring for patients, and doing scholarly things such as writing and publishing dozens of articles in medical journals, which is a skill that helped bring about today's episode. Also joining us from Minnesota is Lily Wood. Hello, Lily. Welcome to your own podcast.
Hi, Richard. Thanks for being the host today.
So, you are the creator and normally the host of NPE Stories. A podcast that now has how many million downloads?
2.7, I believe.
Wow, but who's counting? So no, it's impressive, and I'm happy to be a small part of it. So, joining us from Pennsylvania is Gina Daniel. Good evening, Gina. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. So roughly 3 years ago, Gina earned her doctorate of social work, and interestingly enough, her research dissertation involved interviewing approximately 24 NPE individuals. And Gina, I'm happy to tell you that your research dissertation is now referenced in at least 1 peer-reviewed publication. So next from the Midwest heartland is Jodi Girard. Welcome to you, Jodi.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here.
So, when people make these genetic secrets in the aftermath, they often end up asking, who am I? But many also end up in a rather profound way asking, what am I? And Jodi, your story is an example of that phenomenon. We'll be talking more about that in a few minutes. And then last, but certainly not least, joining us from the West Coast is Eve Sturges. How are you, Eve?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
So you are the creator and host of the podcast Everything's Relative with Eve Sturges, which is definitely one of the must-listen-to genetic secret podcasts. It gives out a lot of good information. You have a lot of interesting guests, and sometimes I find it quite entertaining. So anyway, that's the all-star assembly for this episode. The plan now is for me to spend the next 5 minutes or so just providing listeners with some background information and otherwise setting up the discussion that all 5 of us will then have for the remainder of the episode. So now, what have we done? Well, the 5 of us working together over the past year, actually it's been longer than a year. But we worked together. Everyone made contributions. Some were big, some were small, but all of them were important towards us reaching our goal. And what was that goal? Well, first, let me back up a little bit. Let me mention the American Society of Human Genetics, which hereafter I'll refer to as AHHG. It's fair to say that ASHG is one of, and they would surely claim to be being the most important medical organization regarding healthcare and human genetics in this country. Like most national medical organizations, ASHG publishes a monthly journal containing new research, review articles, case reports, and other articles. This is a peer-reviewed journal, meaning people, usually healthcare professionals, submit their manuscript, which is then reviewed by peers, who vote to either accept the manuscript for publication or to reject it. And as is true for most leading medical journals, the majority of manuscripts submitted to ASG are actually rejected. I personally know how this feels since it's happened to me several times in my career. But in other words, it's a competitive process, and anyone that gets their manuscript accepted has achieved something that most healthcare professionals, researchers, and other people, will never experience. Well, today we are here to celebrate and to discuss our misattributed paternity articles publication in the American Journal of Human Genetics earlier this week. Actually, Lily, do you have sound effects? You got any applause or anything like that?
Yeah,
No?
I'll add something in right there.
You can add something in. So, our article regards what healthcare professionals should and should not do upon the unexpected discovery of or the suspicion of misattributed paternity. Now, listeners may be wondering how this happens, so let me describe a few examples. Let's say my wife and I have a young child, and we notice that something just does not seem right. Maybe our child seems developmentally delayed, or we're worried about them having Down syndrome or cystic fibrosis or some other health issue. So we go to our pediatrician, and the pediatrician might order some tests, including some genetic tests, or the pediatrician might refer us to a genetic counselor who then orders some genetic tests. So my wife, myself, and the child go to a lab and we give a sample. It might be a saliva sample, it might be blood work, and those samples are sent off to a lab and they use their special machines and do their special tests. Now, when this is all done, the lab will have results, and they have to communicate these results back to the pediatrician or the genetic counselor. And that's actually where the problems can start. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But anyway, they send back the results saying that the father and child are not or may not be genetically related. Now, actually, there are several possible explanations as to why a child and a parent or parents are genetically unrelated, and we will talk more about those explanations a little later. But for the moment, I will say the most likely explanation is either misattributed paternity, adoption, or donor conception. And regardless of what it is, the healthcare professional needs to have a conversation and may need to order more tests to solve this mystery. So now the physician or genetic counselor has this information. Well, what do they do with it? They'll likely wonder if somebody already knows or suspects this information. Usually that's directed at the mother. If nobody knows, how does the clinician even begin this conversation, and with whom? Well, over the decades, the majority of clinicians have never begun this conversation. They simply say nothing. They pretend that this problem does not exist. They use vague or super technical language when talking to the parent or parents in the hope that nobody really comprehends what the results actually show. They may write vague notes in the medical records and basically just try to conceal this problem. I think all five of us think that highly educated, highly trained, experienced, resource knowledgeable, government licensed healthcare professionals can and frankly must do better than this. So another example, one that I didn't know about until recently, is that can happen is when someone needs a transplant. Say there's a child, the child is now an adult, but the child wants to donate, for example, a kidney to their father. Well, prior to that surgery, there will be lots of genetic tests. Well, what does the transplant team do when the tests come back and show misattributed paternity? Especially given that the family is already confronting this difficult transplant situation. And now there's this family secret also needing to be addressed. Or maybe it's not a secret. Maybe some of the family members know, or maybe all the family members know. But how is a transplant team going to know that? And just how are they going to approach this? It's actually a big problem right now in the realm of transplant. So anyway, those are two examples. There are other scenarios when a clinician may have genetic information that is unknown to the patient and family. So let's talk about our publication. In our introduction, we discuss how direct-to-consumer DNA tests have dramatically exposed all kinds of genetic secrets, particularly over the last half dozen years or so. Regular listeners to this podcast are undoubtedly quite familiar with the Ancestry.com and 23andMe and all these other tests. So actually, we're not going to spend a lot more time on that. Our article's introduction also points out that, historically speaking, clinicians have been active participants in keeping misattributed paternity a secret, even though they are well aware that doing so is not wise. And in fact, they know that it may be illegal. And that illegality starts in the lab. And I've learned that there's been a long-standing battle between the lab and clinicians. And actually, here's a quote from our article, from our introduction. This is actually taken from another medical journal article that was just published a couple of years ago. And actually, Lily, I think you may have that quote in front of you. It's in our introduction there. You want to read that off for our listeners?
It is difficult to construct a genetic test report that pleases those who do not wish to disclose misattributed paternity, yet accurately states results for legal purposes.
Again, they know that this might legally be a problem. And then, so the lab sends this off, and once the doctor or genetic counselor gets the lab reports, that there could be more trouble. Here's another quote from an article published just a couple months ago in the Journal of Genetic Counseling. This regards a study where they interviewed genetic counselors about what they do when they make a misattributed paternity discovery or they suspect misattributed paternity. And actually, here's what one counselor said, and we included that in our article. And actually, Lily, if you could read that one too as well.
I think we're lucky in that legal didn't ask us to submit to them how misattributed paternity non-disclosure played out. I was worried because we didn't end up doing what legal wanted us to do.
Actually, just for the four of you, you're hearing, we can't do something that's legal. We're not doing what the lawyers are telling us. Any response or any comments to those two quotes?
It just occurs to me that while these situations are incredibly complicated, the problem isn't the misattributed paternity. The problem is that we have no systems, protocols, understanding, framework, context for how to talk about them. So therefore, people don't. That's what occurs to me, especially in the second quote that Lily said, that they literally don't know what to do. And so they don't do anything because we have no precedent.
Yeah, well, that's kind of our whole point with all this. We need a better response. They're capable of doing better. It just simply has not happened. So, and that's why people like us have to help motivate them to change some of their processes. And then our introduction section in our article ends with, frankly, one of the most infuriating sentences that I've ever read in my 3 decades of reading medical literature. A couple of years ago in 2023, I actually published my NPE story in the Journal of Genetic Counseling. And the journal commissioned a response to my article, which is actually an unusual thing for a journal to do. Anyway, the response was written by a genetic counselor who was wishy-washy about whether counselors should tell the truth in misattributed paternity situations. But the very last sentence of the article, I think, just really gives it all away, and I'm just not happy with it. In fact, I'm not even going to read it because I think I'll say bad things. So, Lily, I'll turn one last time to you. If you could read that sentence, it's the last sentence of our introduction.
Lying, fudging, and avoiding the truth should no longer be clinicians' default position.
Let me ask our listeners out there and ask the four of you, are you paying your high-priced insurance premiums and your co-pays so that your clinicians can use lying as their default position? I certainly hope not. And as they said, it should no longer be, which indicates that this has been going on for some time. It's anyway. I'll keep moving because, like I said, I could harp on this forever, and we're not here for that. So, the next section of our article, I think, is an important section because in the last roughly 3 years or so, there has been some nice research. It's really first of the kind research surveying what happens to donor-conceived and adopted and misattributed paternity in the aftermath of their discovery. And actually, one of the recent studies cites 6 themes. And actually, Gina, if you have those in front of you, I'm just curious, can you read off those 6 themes and add any commentary you might want to add?
Sure. 1. Reactions to the direct-to-consumer test results. These were complex and predominantly negative. 2. Reconciling past experiences and relationships. Half of participants expressed long-standing intuitions that a parent was not their genetic parent, and many described not fitting in with their family in terms of appearance or personality. Third is the relationship changes after the NPE discovery and revelation. The misattributed paternity participants' most common feeling was anger toward their mother for concealing an affair's pregnancy, which contributed to a strained relationship, although participants recognized that the decades-long secret had negatively impacted their mother's overall well-being and familial household relationship. Connection to newly discovered family members. Most participants communicated with and met with their newfound genetic relatives, gaining a sense of satisfaction from seeing people physically resembling themselves. Very true.
Mm-hmm.
The fifth one, impact on sense of identity. The major psychological effect was adapting to the reality of a new identity. And the last one is grief and loss. These included self-identity losses and the loss of a presumed genetic connection to their raising father.
Yeah, no, that's quite a few things. We'll circle back to those a little bit. But Eve and Lily, I have a question for you. You've had, between the two of you, literally hundreds of people on your podcast. Do these 6 things sound like the type of things your guests have been saying on your podcast?
Oh, constantly. I mean, this is for people listening to this podcast. These themes are literally what you hear when you listen to NPE stories over and over again.
I was going to say yes, 100%.
So, and Jodi, I think number 4 kind of applies to you in many ways, because I know you've actually met some newfound genetic relatives, some of which, they look like your genetic relatives. I don't know. How did that experience go for you?
Yes. And help me if I'm right with this, is the term genetic mirroring, that you finally see someone, whether that be physical appearance, sometimes it's, mannerisms, but that was huge for me. There wasn't anybody in my family or in my community or, in my school that looked like me. So that was number 4, probably was most definitely the biggest thing for me.
So, yeah, there's genetic mirroring. What did I read another term, just like, it's on the top of my head. I can't think of it right now, but there have been several terms. They all essentially mean the same thing. It's visibly seeing someone that resembles yourself, particularly in childhood. So, and then to me, one of the important things was the comment about the mothers. Number 1, they had a strained relationship with the mothers, but it said participants recognized that the decades-long secret had negatively impacted their mothers. And I think that's something important to acknowledge, that, it can be easy to be angry at our parents, especially at our mothers. But, I think of my own mom, and I got a lot of mixed emotions about some of the things she did. But I do recognize that, particularly in the early years, this was not easy for her at all. And she was just simply doing the best that she could. So I was personally glad to see that comment in there. So
I can say also with that one, Richard, with the mothers, that when my mother left when I was 3, I was confused my entire childhood, wondering why a mom could leave her daughter. And I really believe that she kind of self-destructed in guilt. And I think that's why, she died 20 years after she had me, because she just could not cope. I think it's my best guess. It's hard to be mad at a dead person, but I don't think she could cope with the secret and how that felt.
Yeah. I've heard you've been on a couple of podcasts and heard the story, and just your mom struggled. Let's just put it that way, I guess. Would that be the right word? Or she did the best, like my mom, she did the best she could. So yeah. There was also another large study with 700 NPE individuals, and that examined the circumstances of their conceptions. And actually, Jodi, if you have those numbers in front of you, I think those were interesting numbers. Could you read those off?
Yeah, absolutely. 49% were from their genetic parent's short or prolonged affair. 11% were from their genetic mother's romantic relationship immediately prior to the relationship with their raising or non-genetic father. 10% were from a romantic relationship of an unknown nature. 2% were from a single consensual sexual encounter. 3% were from sexual assault or prostitution. and 23% did not know the nature of their genetic parents' relationship at the time of conception.
Now, I have a few comments I want to make, but before that, do any of you four have any thoughts about those numbers?
I'm surprised. I guess I'm in the 2% from a single consensual sexual encounter. I didn't realize that before.
I would love to go through our podcast episodes as a sample population to see how those percentages match up.
Yeah, anyone listening out there who's doing research, I think there's a lot of research opportunities with these podcasts. You could go in and pull out a lot of really good information. So yeah, I think that'd be a great idea just for that question and several other important questions.
So what I get from it is just how complex this whole situation can be. Because while the 149% is a pretty big number, there are just so many. It's just so complicated, I guess, is what I'm getting at. How this comes about and how we all have similarities in maybe our feelings and our reactions and our emotions. But when you start diving down into each story, there's just so much complexity in the family stories that people are unearthing.
I would say there's two things when I look at this. Number one, as a pharmacist, I look at these numbers and I think, well, we need to teach people, or somebody needs to teach people better use of contraceptives, perhaps, number one. And then the other thing, and more importantly, it seems like over the past few years, every time I have a conversation with a genetic health professional, and I say that NP disclosure should be a standard practice, their instant response is, but what if it's a sexual assault? Well, two things about that. First, nobody needs to remind me that this can happen, because the whole reason I exist on planet Earth right now is because my 25-year-old genetic father sexually assaulted my teenage number. So yes, I am well aware that that happens. Nobody needs to remind me of that. But second, assault, while it happens, and it is terrible, and it deserves our attention, and we need to do better at supporting people, it is nevertheless the exception, not the rule. I mean, here it says 3% were from sexual assault. There's actually one other study we cited in our article. It had approximately 600 NPEs, and they did the same thing, and 63% of conceptions were consensual, and 3% were from assault. So it's a small number. And I just bring that up because so many healthcare professionals immediately go to, this might be an assault, so therefore we can't say anything about it. And I just don't think the data supports that approach. So, and that's just been my experience so far. I presented a poster at the National Society of Genetic Counselors meeting in 2023, and I got a lot of that while I was there. So
I find it interesting that 23% didn't know the nature of their genetic parents' relationship. I think that part, when I interviewed older people, knowing I think you just spin in that narrative of wondering and thinking and trying to delve back into the history to try and pull up ideas and thoughts of, could this have happened? Would this have happened? Would my mom cheat? Was she assaulted? I think when you don't know, that's really hard. And that's a 1 in 4 NPEs.
Yeah. NP number. So yeah, it's illuminating data, we might call it. So some more illuminating data, that 600 NPE study that I just mentioned a moment ago, it said that NPEs who sought out a mental health professional, only 33% reported that professional provided effective support to them. Gina and Eve, you two work in the realm of mental health, so I might turn this to you. Any thoughts or comments or anything you want to add about that, just the mental health support that NPEs have been receiving?
Go ahead, Gina.
Okay. I think in my experience, because I can be Googled and people can find things about me, I think that my experience with the NPE population has been more successful, because I think they already know that I am in the community. And so I think there's something that feels like community to them if they haven't joined anything else and they're just coming to talk about what's happened.
And I think diving into the data, a lot of them say they go see a psychologist, for example, and just the psychologist was unfamiliar with genetic discovery and really just didn't have a good idea as to how to effectively support the person. That's what a lot of comments were in that one article. So there's an opportunity for more clinicians to learn and learn how to support us. So
I will tell you, mine sat there the first time I saw him, and literally it was like his jaw was dropping. And when I got done telling, kind of my story, he said, I don't know what to do with all of this. And so, so we kind of sat there, and it was almost like he was learning and unpacking as I was, vomiting out this story. So yeah, he'd never even heard of such a thing as a DNA test and finding that out.
There's just such a huge need for so much more education. I do want to note that podcasts and Facebook groups were the principal sources of NPEs information. So Eve and Lily, your podcasts, yet more validation of what you're doing and just how beneficial it is for so many people. Interestingly, only 5% of people sought out a genetic counselor, at least in this study, and none sought out a physician. And I don't know why. I can speculate why. Lack of awareness might be one reason, but I personally think it's lack of trust. So, but maybe we'll have that question answered with another study at some point in the future. One other quick comment, and then we'll move on to the next section. There was a study that showed that 75% of NPEs wanted to know their genetic information sooner, because then they could integrate this information into their self-identities, and they would have the opportunity to form relationships with otherwise unknown genetic relatives. In contrast, only 9% of NPEs reported not wanting to know this information before, and 9% were ambivalent about knowing. So again, the majority of NPEs, listen up, healthcare professionals, the majority of NPEs want to know this information, and they want to know it sooner rather than later. So in any event, next we're going to talk about, which is really the key thing in our article, medical organizations' policy statements about how to manage misattributed paternity discovery. Although before we get into that, I just want to take the liberty to make a few comments about our article, because I think it has several key strengths. Number one, there's 5 of us. I could have written this article all by myself, and I would have been one guy spouting off his opinion. But when there's 5 of us speaking in unison with very similar stories, to me, that's very powerful. And my hope is, or our intention is, that it will get healthcare professionals to pay attention. So my public thanks to the 4 of you for being part of this. So we need to have more NPE voices in the medical literature. To my knowledge, the only misattributed voice previously in the medical literature was my article I published a couple of years ago. There's been some articles written by people of donor conception or adoption, but frankly, there needs to be more of their voices in the medical literature as well. And by the way, our article is a bit unique in that we're critiquing and assessing medical practices, and yet we are the people who are the recipients and impacted by those very same medical practices. I've read literally thousands of articles over the years. I cannot recall a single time of ever seeing an article like this. I've spoken to several colleagues recently who have even more medical literature knowledge than I do. They have never seen anything before. So there is a possibility we are literally the medical literature's first authors to ever do something like this. And if we are, that would be quite an accomplishment, quite an interesting thing. Even if we're not the first, I can say with confidence that this is something that is exceedingly rare. So the other thing I'm pleased is we got our article in the right journal. I know from my career that you always have an ideal journal you want to get into. Sometimes they take your manuscript, and sometimes you just publish it wherever you can. But in this instance, we are exactly where we need to be. I mean, our story is quite literally in their face, they being the subscribers and members of ASHG. That's primarily physicians, although they have a number of other healthcare professionals, and I'm sure people who aren't healthcare professionals. But they are the people who help set policies. They are the educators for healthcare professionals. This is the group that we definitely need to reach out to. And then lastly, as we've already done, we've read several quotes and we're going to read some more quotes. A good portion of our article simply uses quotes from other articles. So we're using their own words to illuminate some of the things that are going on. So anyway, let's jump into the heart of our article. So first, let's read off the misattributed paternity statements from 4 organizations. And actually, Jodi, maybe I'll ask you on table 1 there if you could read those off.
Okay, so the American Society of Human Genetics, their applicable language is, while honoring their broad responsibility to be truthful with patients and their families, we recommend that healthcare providers avoid disclosure of misattributed parentage unless there is a clear medical benefit that outweighs the potential harms.
So, and one thing that was published in the year 2015 and is what we call a position statement. Actually, let me ask it for you. I've been living in a cave the last decade. Has anything happened in the realm of genetics and genetic testings over the last decade? Do you know?
Oh, only like 30 million Americans have taken a DNA test.
Only you can do it at home.
For like $39.
Right.
I mean, come on. This is a decade old. This needs to be updated like yesterday. So that's problem number 1. I have some thoughts about their language, but let me ask the 4 of you. What are your thoughts about this, their stance, if you will, or their policy statement?
Well, one thing in the comment that we have in the article is, there is no explanation provided regarding who defines clear, the words clear, benefit, or harm. So it's just
that is a very good point. Actually, Lily, let me ask you, would your definition of benefit and harm be the same as or different from your mother's definition of benefit and harm?
Exactly. Thank you. Yes, because what would be beneficial for me would potentially be harmful for her and her I'm assuming her reputation. I think the statement, they recommend that healthcare providers avoid disclosure of misattributed parentage. I just find that so confusing, so dangerous. It makes me upset to say it. And yet we have our article in their journal. So I'm like, can I say that about them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Our article in their journal in a scholarly way tells them they need to do a lot better.
Yes.
Well, and it's so contradictory. This starts out while honoring their broad responsibility to be truthful. We are going to recommend they lie.
Try that with your boss, or try that with your spouse. Can you imagine if I told my wife, honey, while honoring my responsibility to be truthful, I'm going to avoid telling you where I was at and what I was doing last Saturday night, because at least for me, the benefits do not outweigh the risks.
Or potential harm.
Or potential harm. Exactly. Yeah, I have, I can look at this 2 ways. First, I'll speak as Richard, the healthcare professional. And yeah, I think this statement is in many ways, it's very difficult to operationalize. And we've already alluded to that. Like, how do you do this benefits and harms in the real world? Because the patient, the unknowing parent and the child can have one definition. The knowing parent can have a different definition, and the clinician can have yet a third definition. You got 3 people with their own ideas. How do you make that work in the real world? The other problem is they don't give any examples. This type of language, benefits to risk ratio and benefits and harms, you'll find that in a lot of medical literature, but they usually give some type of example or some type of guide or some type of definition. For example, high blood pressure. Millions of people in this country have high blood pressure. If you have just a little bit of high blood pressure and you have no risk factors, then we might just ask you to make some dietary changes and do some more exercise. But if you have a lot of risk factors, you smoke, you have a strong family history, some other risk factors, then we're going to be more aggressive in our treatment. So you will find examples of risks, benefits with so many other statements. They don't have anything like that here. So I think, and from a healthcare professional perspective, this is very difficult to put into practice in the real world. Speaking as Richard, the NPE, this statement is stupid. And I just said why a moment ago. I mean, honoring your broad responsibility to be truthful. What does that even mean? It just.
they say unless there is a clear medical benefit, well, they only have, because they've figured out that there's a misattributed parentage here. So they only have half of the medical information. They don't know if there's a clear medical benefit.
What you're alluding to is family medical history. Hold that thought, Jodi. It's a good thought. Hang on to it. We're going to come back to it. So actually, go ahead and read the American Academy of Pediatrics. And by the way, I'm going to refer to them from now on as AAP. But go ahead and read them and give off their year as well.
Okay, 2013, this is policy statement from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Misattributed paternity may be uncovered incidentally whenever genetic testing is performed. This risk should be discussed, and a plan about disclosure or non-disclosure should be in place before testing. Comments are non-disclosure is permissible if decided proactively.
Again, can I do that with my wife? Can I proactively decide that I'm not going to tell her that I went to the same town where my old college girlfriend was living? Does that work at all? It just doesn't work. And this one's from 2013. It's even worse. It's a dozen years old. This is the American Academy of Pediatrics, the most important medical organization when it comes to healthcare for children in this country. And yeah, they got a statement that's a dozen years old. So anyway, those are my thoughts. What any comments from you four?
I appreciate that they tried to suggest there could be a plan, that there should be a plan. It's like a very sneaky statement. I feel like it's very sneaky because they're because it's like, oh, no, it could happen. So make a plan. But the plan could be to continue lying.
It's good. I've read a lot of statements over the years like this. Yeah, these things sound like they were written like by some sleazy used car salesman.
It's real loophole.
Actually, in all seriousness, think about it. A group of highly trained, highly educated, I'm sure well-intentioned people got together, but they come up with this. It needed to be better. I'll just say that. So anyway, I'll stop talking. Anybody else with a comment?
I just think this is the second one that is very wishy-washy as far as what do they really mean? What are they trying to say? It just feels like a legal statement to protect all angles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's two more. Maybe Jodi, just read them real quick. In the interest of time, we'll just go through them quickly to the next two.
Okay. The American College of Medical Genetics and Genomics in 2021 policy statement was disclosure should be offered regardless of the patient's age. And just commenting on that, should be offered is not absolute language. Thus, a misattributed parentage non-disclosure is still an option. And then the National Society of Genetic Counselors in 2023, the pre-test counseling process should establish clear expectations for what categories of results will and will not be returned. Will not be returned can be applied to misattributed parentage discovery. So they're just not going to tell you. They're just not going to. They're
just not going to tell you. So those are the statements for the organizations. And actually, Jodi, thank you for saying that, because really what we're talking about here, when you, the healthcare professional, has information and you're not sharing that information that under normal circumstances you would, there's a term for that. That term is called therapeutic privilege. So the American Medical Association says therapeutic privilege is the temporary withholding of important medical information from a patient that ordinarily would be shared based on a clinician's belief that the information's revelation threatens the patient's well-being. Here's the problem with that I skipped over, and let me back up a little bit. The American Medical Association Code of Ethics says, quote, except in emergency, withholding information without the patient's knowledge or consent is ethically unacceptable, end quote. So there you have it, right there, straight from the American Medical Association, arguably the most important medical organization in the United States. They're saying what these other four organizations are promoting is unethical. They go on to say withholding, quote, withholding creates conflict between the physician's obligation to promote welfare and to respect patient autonomy. And they say you should offer full disclosure when the patient is able to decide according to a definite plan so that disclosure is not permanently delayed. And then here's the last one that I really like. It says, Be honest in all professional interactions and strive to report physicians engaging in fraud or deception to appropriate entities. Misattributed paternity, and this is me talking now, misattributed paternity involves deception, one way or another. So in our article, we argue that physicians and really any licensed healthcare professional not disclosing misattributed paternity should be reported. And that's not our recommendation. That's straight from the American Medical Association. Now, who would you report this to? You could report it to your state licensure board. Healthcare professionals are licensed by each individual state. Every state has a licensure board. You could write to them. You could also write to that clinician's organization if they work in a hospital or some big medical organization. I'm sure they have some sort of quality committee or safety committee. You could write to them as well. So there's an action for some listeners out there if they want to take up on that. You could literally report your clinicians. And that's a suggestion I don't make flippantly. I'm a healthcare professional. I don't want people sending in things about me. But I think in this circumstance, it is absolutely warranted. So the other thing, there is a lot of literature about therapeutic privilege that essentially denounces therapeutic privilege. It says it's no longer ethically appropriate in modern medicine and in contemporary practice. Paternalism, because that's what it is, paternalism, you're deciding for the patient. Paternalism has given way to patient self-autonomy. So, and actually the American Medical Association cites 4 hazards to therapeutic privilege, and these all apply to misattributed paternity. So if one of you 4 have those in front of you, can one of you start reading number 1 there?
What if a child hears it from another source? The child may already know. Not knowing could be worse, and evasive answers do not resolve the issue.
So actually, even Lily, in all your podcast guests, how many of them have just had some strange, bizarre, hard to believe story about how the secret was exposed? I imagine that's come up more than a few times.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
And actually, a question for the 5 of us. Of the 5 of us, how many knew in early childhood that something was wrong with we'll just call it our family structure, if you will, or how we fit into our family? I would say 2 of us definitely, but well, I'm definitely one of them. I at age, I don't know the exact age, 6, 7, 8 years old, I understood, particularly with my father and I, something somehow just was not right. I didn't know what it was. I could not explain it, but I knew that at an early age.
I'm abstaining from this question.
Look, Jodi, people can't see because this is a podcast, but yes, can you explain? How did you feel? How were you felt different than your family growing up?
Yeah, well, I didn't look like any of my family. I clearly look, at the very least, I look mixed. I've got very, very curly hair, black hair. Though I did just color. So dark hair, dark brown eyes, very tan skin. I just don't look like any of my family. So yeah, for me, it was for sure. I thought something was a little off.
Yeah.
People started asking me if I was adopted. I remember it starting in like 1st or 2nd grade.
Mm.
And I don't remember thinking about it in a serious, heavy way. I wouldn't definitely have worded it in the 1st or 2nd grade. Like, no, but you're right. There's something I can't explain about why I don't quite fit in. I didn't have any of that, but.
Do you remember how you answered when you were that little?
Yeah, I would just say, no, I'm not. I'm not.
No, I'm not.
I fantasized a lot about being adopted, about that being, and I think I was craving an answer. I think that I liked that narrative, but it didn't upset me. But I remember it very clearly.
So, and yeah, number 4 there, evasive answers do not resolve the issue, and that's really the whole problem here. And actually, going back, I was going to mention that before, going back to those statements, that's something else that's missing in those 4 statements. They said, what's the therapeutic goal here? There isn't one. right? They don't have one. The goal seems to be get these people out of my office and let somebody else, deal with this problem at some point in the future. That's really a major deficiency of the 4 organizations' recommendations that they have so far. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to, we're going to talk a little bit about family medical history. Actually, let me ask the 4 of you, when you hear family medical history, what does that mean to you?
It's what I've been sharing my whole life. What I thought diseases existed with my aunts and uncles and my grandparents and diabetes and heart disease. And that's what I think of when I think of my family medical history.
Yeah, I think of those forms that, any of us who have had children, I feel like, or just going to the doctor, period, the big long form that they want you to check all of the boxes, ethnicities and the diseases that may or may not. And then they ask, okay, so who had this, whether it was heart disease or heart attacks or strokes. I mean, they go down, it's a hugely long list. And then they'll have you put who in your family, what side they want to know, paternal, maternal side. That's what I think of every time I've tried to fill that out.
I think of it like a probability presentation. Like you are presenting what the probability is of your survival.
That's good.
Based on the truth you believe to be
right,
true.
Based on the truth. It's like the probability that I could have any of these things is this high or low, or that I will die from these things, or I will pass these things on. It's a chances. It's like a chances game, kind of.
Yeah. Well, what you're talking about is risk, and you're absolutely right. Yeah. To me, even before I made this genetic discovery a couple of years ago, when I heard family medical history, my thought was my mom and my dad, and what do they have? So they were the most important components of that. And even Lily, I know on your podcast, lots of people say, medical history, and I'm hoping to get a medical history and these types of things. And I don't think you need to be a physician to fully appreciate that. But let's dive into some specifics of what these organizations say. So actually, Eve, if you have table 3 in front of you, or whomever has it in front of them, you read off, we'll go through these one by one. What do they say about family medical history?
The ASHG says collecting a patient's family medical history remains the single most important and informative genetic tests for most individuals.
Eve, I'm going to interrupt you.
Just stop there.
Just stop right there. All right. The ASHG says, unless they basically say don't disclose. And now they say this is the single most important test. I mean, that is not ambiguous language or confusingly. How do you reconcile those two things? Let's give this false history to a child and to a family about the single most important test. This is why I'm so just angry at some of these organizations. They did not think this out. This is, speaking as a healthcare professional, this is not thought out. This doesn't make sense. It's contradictory. It needs to be changed. So anyway, Eve, I apologize. I cut you off. Go ahead and maybe read off the American Academy of Pediatrics and the other ones as well. They have similar statements.
So Pediatrics says family health history plays a major role in identifying familial and hereditary disorders, determining inheritance patterns, and risks for genetic disorders. And the last one says, is the ACMG. DNA-based risk identification in the absence of relevant family medical history does not have sufficient consensus on clinical classifications and management.
And Eve, I'm going to interrupt you. Sorry, right there. That, to me, is a very important sentence. They're saying if you don't have an accurate family history, all these high-priced, whiz-bang genetic tests that you're doing do not have clinical utility. And by the way, the ACMG is the American College of Medical Genetics and Medical Genomics. So that's straight from them. You have to have a family history.
Well, and that's what that statement is what insurance companies use to deny paying for genetic testing. If you don't have a medical history, they can deny your claim to ask for genetic testing, which would help you learn your medical history.
And no, that's an excellent point. We do have that point in our article because this is a real world ramification. There are lots of tests that get paid for if you have a positive family history. But if you have a false family history, yeah, good luck battling your insurance company to try to get them to pay for it.
I was going to say, even if you have, like we thought we did, a family history, and the insurance pays for the genetic testing, and then it doesn't show, you know what I'm saying? It's like the results that you're getting aren't, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, aren't applicable.
Congruent. They're not congruent.
You're right. They're not congruent with what you thought you were testing for.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I was happy. I actually, about a year and a half ago, had a very tense email exchanges with I won't say who it was. Anyway, this person said that there's no evidence that misattributed paternities, people with misattributed paternity have incurred harm from their false family history. And actually, I sent them some statements. The American Academy of Pediatrics and the National Society of Genetics have statements about sudden cardiac arrest and death in children. And it says you need to have a genetic history. And anyway, it got to the point where I said, well, would you rather have a child die? And they responded back, that would be compelling evidence.
Oh,
And I just shook my head at that. And it just made me so mad. And I did find this quote. This was in an article about donor conception. But it says that just a family medical history all by itself, even if you haven't incurred harm, it is nevertheless bad. It says not all donor conceived individuals who remained uninformed about their conception's method are necessarily harmed. However, they are all treated wrongly when they are deprived of the ability to access information about their genetic origins. Stated succinctly, they can be wronged without being harmed. End quote. And I thought that was really good because so many people that I've spoken to in a genetic world are like, well, yeah, show me somebody who died, then I'll believe you. And it's like, no, this all by itself is treating us wrongly, even if we haven't died from a heart attack or something like that. So anyway, yes, that's an example of the battles that
Eve, Eve was going to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of 3 episodes on my podcast off the top of my head that are not about people that died, but people with false medical histories being incredibly worried, stressed, and enduring medical procedures to prevent things from happening because they believed they were related to their fathers, the men that raised them, including one guest whose father died very early of colon cancer, and so she started getting colonoscopies every single year, multiple times a year.
Wow.
At like age 25 or something, just, and then someone else whose daughter was really sick and she was sure that her daughter had what her father had died of. And it turns out that she had not inherited anything. And then Peter Boni, who wrote the book about donor conception, he was incredibly concerned his whole life about his father's suicidal ideation and depression, and was very, he just writes about being incredibly fraught his whole life, thinking that was going to happen. So it doesn't have to be death to be harmful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? That's part of the infuriating complexity of these arguments.
And one other infuriating thing, the American Academy of Pediatrics, in regards to children of adoption, says, quote, a complete medical history, including genetic history obtained from both parents, is ideal. And yeah, and this is me talking now again, yeah, that sounds great. That sounds fantastic. But my question to the AAP is, where's the same statement for children of misattributed paternity? Right? They need to, and we said that in our article. We posed that there. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to another big topic, the whole issue of race and ethnicity. And I'll start off with a quote from the American Medical Association that says, quote, a family medical history helps physicians and other professionals provide better care. The family medical history should be detailed, including ethnicity, because some genetic diseases are more common in certain ethnic groups. The American Academy of Pediatrics also has a core principle that says honoring racial, ethnic, and cultural background and patients and family experiences, end quotes. Jodi, we've already alluded a little bit to this, but we're going to turn to you as our resident expert on this. What are your thoughts about those statements?
It's interesting to me that they would say they recognize ethnicity's importance. in treating a patient. And yet, until I met you, Richard, I got to be honest, I had not even thought about this aspect of my life growing up. It just had always been my relationships, with family and friends or whatever. I had not even thought about the fact that at that time, it was just a family doctor in a small town. So, I mean, he wasn't necessarily just a pediatrician. He treated every member in my family. So my mom, my dad, my other two siblings growing up. So he was all of our doctors. Never once said anything or questioned it. Then even when I'm married and having children and only checking the white box on that little form that I fill out, not once did anyone say something like, well, did you forget one, or did you meet, or, even just in an off, kind of beating around the bush kind of way, ask me, don't tell me about yourself. Are you from here? Just anything. Nobody ever asked a thing. So if it's important,
and that had consequences. What
it
if
did.
you'd be willing to share that story?
Yeah, no, it definitely had consequences. I ended up with a son who was in the hospital for a week with diabetic ketoacidosis. And had I known that not only did my biological father, he was a type 2 diabetic, but every one of his siblings, I've learned as I've met family, every one of his siblings, which I think there were 8 of them total, all were type 2 diabetics. And then of my new siblings that I have found, I have 4 of them who are type 2 diabetics as well. Another one that's pre-diabetic. Another one has hypertension. And just this last year, I was diagnosed as being pre-diabetic. So it's definitely something that would have been nice to know that ran so heavily in my family.
Yeah. Speaking as someone who worked in the emergency room for many years, yes, I've treated diabetic ketoacidosis, which is, for listeners out there, it's a serious complication of diabetes that can be, and sadly for people has been, fatal. Same thing with my pediatrician. I mean, they failed us. There's just no other way to describe it. I get that it was a different time, different era. I never met your pediatrician, Jodi. Obviously, I know nothing about them, but someone who was intelligent enough to become a physician was also intelligent enough to make the observation that you didn't look like any other child in their practice. And there must be some sort of reason for that. And yet that was never pursued, nor was it pursued in adulthood either. Yeah, they failed you. Healthcare, and I am a healthcare professional. We failed you. So I do want to point out from our article, we've done a lot of complaining about healthcare professionals, but our article has several recommendations for healthcare professionals. And one of the things we said, quote, "We believe that asking whether a patient has concern about their genetic heritage's validity should become standard practice during clinicians' history-taking processes." So I just want to make clear to listeners that our article, it points out a lot of the contradictions and the silly things that these organizations are doing, but we also did our best to include several recommendations and actions that we can take.
Even say then on top of that, with Eve and Gina in their practices, the impact for me on a sense of identity. I mean, we have that listed as one of the 6 major, issues that people deal with. And that was huge for me growing up, thinking, I guess for all intents and purposes, I was white. And then realizing I have this entire, not only other half of a family, but a culture that I had never explored. I didn't know what to do with. I didn't know what it meant. I mean, I kind of felt like I was this 45-year-old who was like joining an ethnicity, which is bizarre to think about. It's like, I don't even know what that means. And, even I'm 7 years in and still trying to work through some of that. So it's even a mental health issue that I think a lot of NPEs, and even if you don't have an ethnicity change, it's a huge mental health travel, a little journey there that you got to go on.
Yeah, it is. Actually, I have a question for the 4 of you. Okay, I'm the healthcare professional. I have this test result. Dad and the child are genetically unrelated. If I articulate that to dad and or the child, Have I? And if so, how have I violated the mother's, we'll call it, privacy? What are your thoughts about that?
I can see how the mother would think you're violating her privacy, but I'm just thinking of the child. I don't know if I have any further thoughts on that, because that's three different people. I just am thinking you're a healthcare professional. That child needs to know their accurate medical history.
Yeah. Anyone? It's a tough question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I say a lot of things that wouldn't answer the question, which is like, well, it would absolutely depend on the context of the situation, depend on where the mother was. It would depend on if she could be a part of the conversation, but that's part of the precedent we don't have. It wouldn't, anything that we say doesn't need to be an all or nothing blanket response to these situations. There are ways to be delicate and tactful and kind about anything. So I would need to know more information about that scenario.
Yeah.
I just feel like these people went to medical school. They should be better versed at handling these situations.
Well, yeah. And yes. Speaking as someone who's worked most of their career in acute care, every day across this country, thousands of healthcare professionals, to the best of their abilities, relay all kinds of bad news that no one wants to hear that's going to impact the patient as well as their family. I've been there when we've told people we have to amputate your leg to save your life. I've been there when we've told people we have to amputate both of your legs to save your life. I have been there to tell people that the cancer has spread and you have 6 months to live. I was directly involved in that. We had a case come to the emergency room. The physician thought it was a case of child abuse. The parent said the child had fallen down from this medication. They were from a foreign country and they had a medicine from a foreign country. This was many years ago before you could look all this stuff on the internet. So the physician called me, pharmacist. I need to know what's in this medicine, because if it's something that's sedating, then he's going to let the parents go. But if not, he's calling the Department of Children and Family Services. So no pressure on me to get this correct. Anyway, it was just some children's vitamin. There was absolutely nothing in there that would cause any drowsiness. I told the physician that. The physician called the security guard, posted it right outside the door, told the parents, you are not allowed to leave. The Department of Children and Family Services is on the way. I've been there when we've told people, you have a substance abuse issue. We need to admit you to we had an inpatient substance abuse clinic at our hospital. Anyway, my point with all this is all day, every day across this country, healthcare professionals are conveying life-altering, sometimes life-ending information to people to the best of their ability. How and why the genetic world seems to have carved themselves out of the responsibility to do that has just astounded me and disappointed me and makes me angry, and I don't get it. So, and actually back to what we were talking about, the scenario that we were talking about, the ASHG's misattributed paternity statement actually says, quote, there is an asymmetry of risk. Only the fidelity of the mother is at stake from disclosure. For this reason, it is common practice to disclose only to the mother. Pre-test counseling could include confidentially informing the mother of the potential detection of non-paternity, end quote. Right after that, I wrote it, I think is the most damning sentence in our entire article. And that says the ASHG makes no mention of the child's asymmetric risks. And that is consistent through all this literature. None of it is written from the perspective of the child. Only a handful of them even mention the child or how this might impact the child. It is quite clear none of these individuals who've created these policy statements had the child's long-term interest. I don't know how or why, they just didn't think about it. But back to this whole idea of the mother's the only thing at stake. A couple things about that. First of all, the ASHG is presuming wrongly that misattributed paternity results only from infidelity. Now, I would agree that's more than likely the most common reason, although we don't have data to support that. That's another thing. We have misattributed paternity is probably as old as human beings themselves, and yet we have barely any really good scientific data looking at it. There are other reasons why this could happen. I mentioned this at the beginning of our podcast. There could be several explanations. One of those reasons is called chimerism. I'm not going to get into a big, long technical explanation of chimerism. You can go to the internet and type in what is chimerism, chimerism. You can read all about it. Think of it as essentially a genetic mutation. That could be one reason why you'd have a child genetically different than their father. Another cause is the switching of newborns at hospital discharge. And actually, most of you know Shirley Munoz Wilson. Lily, I think she was on your podcast not that long ago.
Yes.
Her story, I just find it so heartbreaking. And it's just another example. Her nickname was the Little Dark One. That's what she titled her book about this. It's a very good book. I would encourage everyone to get it. People knew something was wrong. Healthcare professionals knew something was wrong, but nobody investigated it. And actually, this astounded me. In 2019, which it wasn't that long ago, the Joint Commission, they regulate this nation's hospitals. They issued a distinct newborn identification requirement for this nation's hospitals because there are so many medical errors involving newborns. They get the wrong medicine, get the wrong medication, the wrong procedure is done on them, all these things, and including the wrong discharge to the wrong family. We don't know how prevalent that is, but my worry is it is more prevalent than people realize. So there's been a number of in vitro fertilization mistakes, although not all of them are mistakes. If you want an example of that, go to watch the Netflix documentary, Our Father, and you'll find out more about that. But yeah, again, medical mistakes, they use the wrong sperm sample for insemination, and they find out later there's a mismatch between the child and the father, and they don't know why, and maybe they make accusations against the mother. It just leads to a whole bunch of problems. One of the problems with not disclosing misattributed paternity is then you're also not reporting these mistakes. So that allows, which number one, contravenes requirements. Medical professionals are required to report these mistakes. And number two, it allows the reason for the mistakes to persist and happen again and again. Some other concerns or some other reasons someone might be genetically unrelated to one or more parents is it might have been an illegal adoption, or it might have been a child abduction, or it might have been an abandoned baby. I mean, these are legal and potentially criminal situations. And when healthcare professionals follow the ASGHGs and these other organizations' recommendation of don't say anything, you are, in a very literal sense, risking letting a criminal walk free. Actually, my genetic father, he assaulted my mother. Guess what he did in the subsequent years? He assaulted additional young women, including other underage women. I mean, this is the hazards of healthcare professionals not bringing this up more, not exploring this more, not finding out more information. And then I'll finish up with this idea about, does disclosing somehow violate the mother's privacy? I would argue no. And actually in the article, we argue no. And the reason why is to determine misattributed paternity, you need two biological samples, one from the child and one from the father. Whether or not it's genetic, it doesn't really matter because the test is going to tell you one way or another that there are others. So you have two people who are providing a biological sample. The idea that two people providing a biological sample somehow violates the privacy of an untested third person, I would argue that's an argument that's difficult to vindicate, right? It just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. And certainly it is atypical to how we typically protect patients' information in healthcare settings. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense. The other thing I would say is, and here we're talking about HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which is a widely misunderstood law by so many people, including healthcare professionals. But the reality is the father could request that his protected health information, that lab test, not be disclosed to anyone else, including the mother. So in truth, the opposite of ASHGs, only inform the mother, is the reality of it all. So anyway, I'm sorry, I went on a long rant. Anybody want to add any thoughts or add a counterpoint or anything like that? No, I convinced all four of you. Strong argument, compelling argument. Good.
It really was.
So, all right, we're getting near the end here. I know we're getting short on time. Several organizations justify misattributed non-disclosure because they don't want to disrupt the family unit. And I say to that, and we said in our article to that, this idea that clinicians are to prioritize a fictionalized genetic family narrative or the ethically and legally expected conveyance of factual medical information, again, is hard to rationalize. And it's the circular logic. A genetic falsehood exists. We can't tell the truth because we might expose the falsehood, so we'll let the falsehood continue, right? The mere existence of the lie is self-serving as justification to continue the lie. Again, that is very atypical in healthcare settings. So, and then just to finish up, I want to talk a little bit about the National Society of Genetic Counselors. This should be an organization who you think would be all over this, but they are not. We were, as we say in our article, we were unable to locate specific guidance from the NSGC regarding how clinicians should disclose misattributed paternity, right? This is like their job, and they're not doing it. So, and then relatedly, what should genetic counselors document in instances where there's genetic tests showing misattributed paternities? Should counselors knowingly falsify medical records, which they admit to doing in several publications, including one from just like 6 months ago? It's just crazy. They do have a statement that says for adoptees, quote, collect available health information, including medical, genetic, and family history for children entering the adoption process. That's great. Where's a similar statement for misattributed paternity children? They don't have one. And then they also have a policy statement that says ensure that practitioners correctly interpret and deliver results, create transparency, and improve public awareness, end quote. I mean, there's just, when you don't disclose misattributed paternity, you're violating this policy. Again, there's so many contradictions within these organizations. They say, be honest, but just don't be honest when it comes to misattributed paternity. And it needs to be changed. It needs to be rectified. So anyway, any final thoughts or closing thoughts anybody wants to add?
Well, I do remember, Richard, you and I talking offline, and we were talking about disrupting the family unit. And you reminded me of how many things do disrupt that. You were talking about child abuse and substance abuse. And if you could just remind me of that again.
Well, it's sort of what I was saying a few minutes ago. Yeah, every day, healthcare professionals across this country convey information that could absolutely disrupt the patient's life and the family's life. Yeah. We think this is child abuse. The authorities are going to get involved. What bigger thing is there to disrupt a family situation? Or we think this is a case of substance abuse. And it may be I've seen it over the years in our emergency room. Some individuals and their family members, they knew somebody had a problem with alcohol or prescription narcotics or whatever it was. And there are other instances where the family members had no idea this was going on. So it was a completely, shocked to them. Again, in the emergency room, people come in, they get tested, they have sexually transmitted diseases. So we have to ask them, who are your partners? We need to contact them. They need to get treatment.
Yes.
Talk about something disrupting your life and disrupting the lives of the people around you. Again, this happens every day. This kind of stuff happens every day. And this idea that the genetic professionals are somehow exempt from conveying difficult information that the family might not, it could disrupt the family. I get that. I don't like it. Mm-hmm. But when the kid a few years later gets diagnosed with cancer, Jodi, all of us have alluded to this. The kid gets diagnosed with cancer, some other terrible illness that could have been diagnosed earlier, prevented earlier. And again, you don't even need some terrible disease, just the idea. And so, we've experienced it. This idea, I'm 8 years old and I don't look like anybody around me and I have no understanding as to why. That is distressful to a child. That is harm right there. And that's why they need to use their skills and their training. If you, the genetic counselor, don't have the ability to do it, that's okay. That's why we have referrals. Refer them to mental health services, a psychologist, family therapy, whatever the case may be. There are options out there. Again, I said it before, I'm saying it again, and then I'll stop. So many of these policies are written from the perspective of, I just need to get this family out of my office so I don't have to deal with any of this, and somebody else at some point in the future can take care of this problem. That's what so many of these policies say to me. Go ahead.
Well, and I would say that the idea that non-disclosure is what is good for the family union doesn't take into account things that can happen because of the non-disclosure. So in my case, unfortunately, I shouldn't say that. Fortunately for me, I had an amazing father who raised me. I can give you countless examples from our Facebook group, support group, that is not that way. I mean, there are people who say, my father who raised me was abusive. He, never treated me like the other children. Moms even that were abusive because of the fact that they knew, that there was something, that this child represents something that could blow her life up. So the idea that non-disclosure is making it better for that child isn't necessarily the truth. Life at home could be very difficult. Everybody around them knows what's going on.
There actually are some publications from the donor conception world where that was not disclosed and parents treated their child differently than other children or somehow adversely, interacted with their child. There is data about that from the donor conception world. And to think that it wouldn't happen with misattributed paternity is crazy. Absolutely it's happening. Just a final few thoughts. Our article, we do make a number of recommendations for healthcare professionals that no matter what the parents say, they're not going to portray a false genetic narrative. They're not going to document bogus medical information in a chart. Medical records are legal documents, by the way. They're not going to do that. They should facilitate interdisciplinary collaboration, get people engaged with psychological services, social workers, legal help, whatever is needed. If there's some circumstance where the risk of physical harm to someone is a bona fide risk, well, then maybe you need to get law enforcement involved or whomever it may be. Anyway, my point is we have in our article several recommendations for healthcare professionals to do. And then I'll finish up with a word of warning for the healthcare professionals out there. You're by not disclosing, you're taking on several risks. Number one, you're taking on the risk of medical malpractice. And I think some lawsuits are going to arise as people get more knowledge and read articles like ours and realize some things that weren't done well. I think lawsuits are coming against some healthcare professionals that did not disclose. And again, I don't say that flippantly. I don't want a lawsuit. I think this country has too many lawsuits as it is. But I think in this case, it is warranted. So that's number one. Number two is, and I already mentioned this, people might complain to the state licensing board. You're putting your license at risk by non-disclosure. Again, it's at a state level. There's 50 different states. I don't know how each individual state is going to view this, but my guess is there's at least a few states who would view this quite negatively and absolutely would somehow sanction the clinician's license. I mean, you're literally talking about their ability to work and earn a paycheck. And then lastly, the insurance companies, most healthcare professionals have liability insurance. It's just like car liability insurance. You get in a crash, or the insurance company pays for the crash that was caused by you. Liability insurance, if you do something and someone sues you, you can step in. But most liability policies say if you lied, you did fraud, you knowingly and willfully did something wrong, like documented wrong information in the legal medical record, they'll say, hey, your policy is exempt from that. We are not paying for this. You can pay for an attorney out of your own pocket. And if you lose this $1 million lawsuit, you can pay the $1 million yourself. So I think those are three risks that clinicians are facing. And I think in the coming years, this is going to become a bigger deal, particularly as NPEs get more and more education about just really how healthcare professionals have failed us. And they just need to do better. So we shall see. Anyway, I've done most of the talking. Let me turn the final comments over to you four.
I'm just so humbled to have been a part of just getting the conversation started. I think it's a very important conversation. We don't, profess to know all of the answers, but we know that it's broken and that things need to be discussed and fixed. And I think there are good solutions out there. Then, like you said, Richard, you listed some recommendations that we have, but it's an important conversation to get started.
Absolutely.
I'm very hopeful that we can, change some policies, some things in some of the statements that some of these organizations made. They'll read this and understand. I think that's I think that's what I'm most proud of, thinking that we could have kicked off some kind of a storm of change, which would be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all said this within our private communications, but extra special gratitude and thanks to Richard for spearheading this project and inviting me. I can only speak for me, but inviting me and I have learned so much through this and feel so proud to be a part of the kind of conversation I want to be having, and inviting me to participate in a different avenue than I normally do. And it's been really an empowering experience.
Eve, I knew you had a lot of free time. You have nothing else going on in your life, so I knew you could. So actually, here, we'll end with this. And Eve, you made a comment about this in one of your social media things the other day. Where this article gets out of the vacuum in the podcast and the Facebook groups. Let me be clear. Those are fantastic resources. They have helped many people, including me personally. But there's been a lot of discussion in recent years within those groups, and we need to get our message out to a broader audience. And me personally, that's probably the proudest thing I am with this article is we're not only getting out to another audience, but getting out to an important audience who needs to read this information. So I'd encourage everyone else out there as well, as best you can. Again, the podcast and the Facebook groups and all that stuff is great. Keep using those. But where you see an opportunity to speak to someone or some organization or whatever it may be that you may not have spoken before, take your message to them as well. We need to expand the people that are hearing this.
Absolutely.
This article will be available for free for the next couple of months at the American Journal of Human Genetics. I have a link on the NPE Stories Facebook page, and if you email npestories@gmail.com and put PDF in the subject heading, I'm happy to send you the PDF of this article.
And Lily, let me share my email too. I created a special email just for this. It's NPE, N as in Nancy, P as in Paul, E as in elephant, advocate, A as in apple, D as in dog, V as in victory, O as in orange, C as in cat, A as in apple, T as in Tom, E as in elephant. Actually, did I spell that correctly? npadvocate@gmail.com. If anyone out there has a story about their healthcare professional and non-disclosure or a family medical history issue, or they had some medical procedure they didn't need, or they should have gotten one and didn't get it, please email me, and maybe that'll be the next article we publish.
These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come heal with us.